evening and welcome to The Pipeline. I'm Western Standard columnist Cory Morgan. This is our weekly panel show where we pick a number of issues and analyze them, chew them up, and try to give our thoughts and views on them for the viewers. And boy, there's just an embarrassment of riches when it comes to stories to try and cover and talk about. So on the lineup today, I'll start on the far end. We have our energy, business, and general reporter Shaun Polczer here to add his view today. So welcome, Shaun.
Thanks, Cory.
And as always, the opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford, in the middle there, as we shake up our lineup. You're a good, consistent body there.
Always good to be here, Cory.
Great. Well, and let me get to the business out of the way to begin with, though, and it's important. This episode of The Pipeline is sponsored by New World Precious Metals, and they're based right here in Alberta. Buy local, guys. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the average Canadian savings. I mean, what are the interest are they paying in the bank these days, guys? Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value, and they have for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms to help you grow and protect your hard-earned wealth with gold and silver. Get into it, guys. The precious metals, that's where it's at. newworldpm.com. All right, well, where to begin? I guess we will start with Alberta. It's familiar turf with us. We got a budget coming down, and we'll talk about that after budget, I guess. But for now, I mean, the legislature's been dominated as it comes into its opening by a budding Alberta Health Services scandal. I mean, we've got allegations, and that's what I mean. Lots and lots of allegations. No proof quite yet on anything, but of procurement issues, of battles between the former head of Alberta Health Services, which is the bureaucracy running it. She was fired. Now she's suing the government. But now kind of a bombshell hit. A senior minister, Peter Guthrie, a minister of infrastructure, has resigned suddenly and said he can't function within cabinet any longer. I mean, over this scandal, though, he again left with a bunch of allegations of things that, hints at impropriety, but nothing specific, and is on the back bench. I mean, Nigel, how do you think this kicks off? I guess the start of a legislative session. This is a pretty rough beginning.
Well, it certainly is. The rough thing about it, though, is that nobody really knows what it is that is rough.
Yeah.
I mean, all we have as allegations and innuendos and suggestions. I mean, there's this idea that somebody has resigned on a matter of principle, and Guthrie, I believe, was one of Danielle Smith's early supporters. So people are drawing significance from the fact that an early friend has become an early deserter. Well, okay, but what is his point? He has not said. We can only guess. Going to the larger issue of the scandal, again, I'm not sure what the scandal is in any detail. There's the implication that perhaps contracts for certain medical procedures, which, by the way, there was a huge demand for. This is knees and hips and things like that. That if you need a new hip, if you need a new knee, you're cursing because if you can't get one, and with an 18-month waiting list, you can see why the government that was committed to providing more and faster service for people who had health issues would be looking in a way. So, but the issue seems to be that maybe there was some impropriety about who allocated what onto which clinic. But nobody's actually come out and said it was this clinic, and that person did the wrong thing, and that person needs to be accountable. So all we have is Danielle Smith has asked for the provincial auditor general to get right on it, expedite the report. And I guess when we have that, we'll know more. At the moment, it's just kind of smelly.
Yeah,
There's
that's
nothing
it.
specific.
There's a lot of smoke, but we just don't know what the heck's going on. And it's frustrating because, I mean, I think mostly on board having alternatives, private facilities that could hopefully, the principle of having those ease the pressure on these specialized procedures is fantastic. Conservatives have supported that. But if they blow the process, it could actually set the development of these alternatives back, and that's what I'm most fearful of.
Yeah, well, I guess if you had a procedure in the last couple of months, you're probably saying, well, at least I got mine before everything went wrong,
Well, the Premier had a press conference on Monday, and, I've kind of been on the edge of this because I've sat in on a few of these pressers. This is about the extent of my familiarity with it. But she made the point that they've been increasing the health budget since she was elected, precisely to eliminate that backlog of procedures. And I think I don't quote me on this number, but I think she said it was something like $6 billion that has gone to AHS, and the number of procedures that have actually been performed in a hospital has not, hasn't moved very much, whereas the only increase has been through these private clinics. And, she made a comment on the procurement end of the contracts that AHS was bidding them wrong, that it was equivalent of buying a car without the engine and having to pay extra for the tires, that it wasn't an apples-to-apples comparison. So I think it's like you said, Nigel, the jury's still out, and until somebody actually gets a good auditing and pours through those line items in those books, we're probably not really going to know.
Yeah, well, there is definitely some bad blood between the Smith government and Alberta Health Services bureaucracy. I mean, they're resisting the reforms. I mean, she's broken it up. I mean, part of what Smith was talking about at that conference was AHS was saying, well, the procedures for, say, I think it was knee replacements were only $4,000 with us, but they're $8,000 in the private facility. But it sounds like they were leaving out a whole lot of the other expenses that
the implants, the diagnostics,
incurs.
Yeah.
So now we've got, misrepresenting of the figures being batted back and forth. We got an ideological battle going on with our health system, I think, is kind of what's happening. And
well, it's completely ideological. The idea of performing surgeries in private clinics, it was ideological and political even before the present government was elected. I mean, this is an issue that's gone back years.
But there were always some medical procedures that were performed in private facilities, and nobody had a problem with it.
Eye surgeries.
Surgeons, for example.
Okay.
Hockey
players, I was thinking, MRIs on knees and
things like that. And of course, they're outside the system. Anything that smacks of a workman's compensation claim, or the RCMP, or the military, or Indigenous, all of these things can fall outside the provincial health system. No, I mean, I'm one of the lucky guys who just reads about knee replacements. If I needed one, I would be highly motivated to go deep into this. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people, thousands of people, need these operations. The waiting list has been historically anything up to 2 years from the time of seeing the specialist, not from the time that your actual consulting physician says, I'm going to refer you on. And when you finally see the specialist, then you get, it's going to be 18 months, it's going to be 2 years. So the idea of taking a chunk of money and saying, let's get these caught up, because we actually do have the facilities in the province to do this, and we have physicians who are capable of doing it, who don't get any OR time because it won't be funded by Alberta Health.
The Premier brought that issue up as well.
Yeah.
The fact that some of these surgeons are only limited to like 2 days OR time a month.
And this is how the bureaucracy controls health costs. They ration service. Well, that's not actually the way to provide a health service.
Well, and Premier Smith has always been against the concept of rationing healthcare. I mean, this is an issue that goes way back to our time at the Herald when she was on the editorial board. 20
years ago, having these very same discussions with her. Yeah.
Socialized medicine is rationed medicine. We know that. Yeah. I mean, it's always been the nature of it.
Well, and the idea that even if you throw more money at it, it doesn't seem to be, the backlogs don't get any shorter.
The bloat just eats it up.
Right.
So going further, I mean, something that's kind of distressing coming out of this, though, again, back to Peter Guthrie again. Now, he's a prickly sort. He had some big clashes when he was in Premier Kenny's caucus as well. He's just not a good team player. That's his nature. Doesn't mean he's a bad person. Just some people do better in gelling with the crowd, and some just are quick to call out the leadership. So something can happen with him. He'd put a note forward calling for the resignation of Health Minister Adriana LaGrange. And that got leaked, but it wasn't leaked by Peter Guthrie. And part of where Peter Guthrie lobbed a bunch of his bombs on the way out the door was actually at Cabinet itself. He sounds like he's not getting along with them. And again, we get to speculating, but it gets worrisome because the worst enemy of Alberta Conservatives are Alberta Conservatives. They love ripping themselves apart within their own parties. Do you think that might be signs that we've got some chafing going on in Daniel Smith's cabinet right now? Or is it just perhaps Guthrie?
It sure seems to me. I'm not entirely familiar with Mr. Guthrie. He takes a pretty low profile. I do know that the infrastructure portfolio is a very large money portfolio. Typically, the person who has been in that portfolio has considerable amount of power within the cabinet just by virtue of the amount of dollars that get spent on a capital budget. And, that was my first thought. And talking with some colleagues, said, Jason Kenney's biggest problem was, caucus unity. And Premier Smith, up until now, has been able to keep the party fairly well unified. But, we know how fast these can get out of hand and get away from her. And it seems to me that this could be the sign of some cracks, some internal dissent.
Let's hope it's, just a small conflagration that can be put out quickly and hope for the best. I mean, again, we're left speculating, but when you see so much smoke, you can't help but worry.
Yeah, that's right. But, you could also go down the list of things that she seems to have done right and which are broadly approved of. I mean, she reacted very well to the initial Trump tariffs threat. Mm-hmm. Actually, you want people on the border, we'll put people on the border. Like it was done. Ottawa, they were still talking about it. I guess there are different opinions about the efficacy of putting, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but the idea of taking people off the street who clearly are not responsible for themselves and putting them in a treatment center seems like something everybody can get behind, especially if it's your kid who you're taking off the street. And the whole approach that she has taken to fighting drug addiction seems to have been very much more successful than what they're doing across the border in BC or back in anywhere else in the country. 39% reduction in the death rate compared to our peers. These are things that she can take credit from. Let's see whether we're still saying this after we see the budget tomorrow, but so far so good. So this could be just one of those dumb bureaucratic bubbles that goes up, and when we know the whole story, we won't be so concerned.
Well, even on your example, though, with the drug treatment center, you're talking 2 facilities, basically $189 million. Those are the kinds of things that Mr. Guthrie would be signing off on in terms of the contracts and the procurement to actually build those. So this is kind of how, it all intersects, right?
Yeah. And that segues into where I wanted to go with this. That is a big capital project, and it's health, and it's another category of the HS that's broken up because that'll be under the mental health and addictions, which used to be all under one umbrella. And Premier Smith, I think, is on the right track. She's doing the right things, and she does take aggressive action rather than just twiddling her thumbs on this issue or more studies or more inquiries, which is great.
Absolutely. And you know what else? It's also a border issue. So this is how the public health issues kind of coincide with some of these tariff issues as well, right? Because taking the drugs and the people that are addicted off the streets is ultimately ties back into our economy.
Yeah, so let's look at this. So $189 million, let's call it even 180. So $90 million for 2 facilities, one each. We've got a recipe for a lot of potential trouble if they screw this up. That's where we get into procurement again, right? There's going to be some people very eager to get those contracts to build, maintain, operate those facilities. Please keep it clean. Please don't mess this up. Please make sure it's a good, robust bidding process, and that we really have the best interests of the patients and the taxpayers in mind. That's where maybe we should look at the smoke that's going on right now and give extra scrutiny to the move on these centers just to make sure it's done right.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Cory. But I mean, it is very unlikely to be the Premier or any of her close associates who would be out there to take a profit from the building of those facilities. The place where you've got to keep your eye is on those people handling the forms and the paperwork.
It's the bureaucrats down below.
Oh, you bet.
And in BC, some of that's been breaking with the enablement centers, and I'll call them that. The place where they're handing out the free drugs, and it turns out a lot of those operators were making some pretty darn good money from the government feeding these addicts, and even if the initial people with those centers were well-meaning, and that's what I mean and I don't want to see Premier Smith's government directly dealing with. That's where the problems come as well. They're there for oversight. Just make sure that, try to make sure that these, as you said, the later stages don't go into the wrong road, I guess.
Well, I think those are separate issues. I was at the press conference on Monday announcing the centers, and I couldn't help but recall, during the election campaign, the Premier had a couple, they were very emotional media briefings, with talking with some of the families and some of the victims, and so I definitely think that her heart is in the right place on this. That drug addiction is not a choice, and that the whatever you want to call it, forcible confinement, to get these people in, to force them into treatment, basically, is the right approach. But what also struck me was basically just the implementation of the policy and all the various levels, and how many hoops and things that you have to go through with, capital budgets and operating budgets, bureaucracy. Now we've split it up into different departments, and there's a whole reorganization going on there. And it seems to me that that is probably the biggest, most complicated piece of the whole puzzle, to, like you said, actually making it work and showing results.
And some of the other discussion is I guess, ideological, but the taking of somebody's liberty if they haven't committed a crime. This has already got precedent under the Mental Health Act. If a person's going to harm themselves or others, it's not easy to do, but a person can be, constrained in a facility.
Or maybe they ought to.
Well, it could go either way. And I mean, I believe in this. I believe it would be an action of last resort. I've already heard the naysayers, the Smith haters out there saying, they're going to be snatching people up and locking them up. Look, there's only 300 beds. We've got a heck of a lot of addicts. It's only when they hit rock bottom before that kind of intervention.
And I do believe that somebody has to ask for it. The parents, maybe.
Yes, or
Right.
Police. There's a few healthcare professionals.
Corey, contrary to what you may think, and I actually read your columns.
That's good.
I
No
remember, it's so good. It would be easy to sort of click, and they're published, But I remember one you put out about 18 months ago. You were addressing this very subject, and you said it is not an act of kindness to walk past somebody who has just passed out on a bench in a pool of their own urine.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't use the argument, they have a right to do that, because they're past making rational decisions. At what point do you step in and help somebody without actually identifying that very point? You pointed out that particular person needs help and needs help now.
Exactly, and that's part of why I'm as unvarnished as I am with it.
They're not in a position to ask for it.
Because some people too say, we got to maintain their dignity. The dignity's long gone. That ship sailed.
No, yeah, that just struck me. Like, it's not a dignified. It's not a dignified thing to allow people to. And I do recall that column. That was when I started here.
Some people got two readers. But it is a frustrating issue, and again, it would only be last resort. These are parents or siblings, or again, I read the legislation or where they're proposing for it. Health professionals. I mean, if they've had somebody who's in for their 10th overdose, they can apply and say, maybe we should put this person somewhere controlled and see. Anyways, try. And people say, the failure rate's so high. Well, there's an interesting thing. Where? Because I haven't seen this done anywhere. I've been searching. There aren't centers like this anywhere. So it may not work. I sure hope it will. But people keep saying it doesn't work. Well, how are you saying it when you don't have a base example to draw from? I can't see how, even if it's a low success rate, if you've taken them from that point, as you said, where they've lost control of their functions and they're on a bench, and bring them in, get them fed, detox a couple of weeks so that their mind is at least a bit clear. Even if there's only a 10% chance that they're going to respond to treatment at that point, that's 10% more than if you left them out there.
Well, and most rational people would choose to be better, don't you think?
I think so.
Yeah, but you've kind of got to force them in and dry them out to hit that point of thinking about it.
I am told by those with greater exposure to this that after an extended period of time on drugs, your ability to actually want your own best interest is somewhat diminished. But people who say this won't work somehow so often leave me with the feeling that they don't want it to work. And so why would that be the case? And what would be in it for them for it to say, you see, we told you it wouldn't work. Now we're going to, is this back to safe supply?
Well,
It's frustrating where it gets to that ideological thing. Like, if the safe supply was working, honestly, if it was working, if they were handing it out and it led to these people being stabilized and then seeking treatment and getting clear, I'd say carry on.
You bet.
Keep giving it to them by all means.
Whatever works.
I don't care. Yeah. And
Right.
I still believe in perhaps offering safe consumption sites to try and reduce the overdoses, not giving them the drugs, but at least giving them a safe spot, and also where they can have a counselor handy and try and snatch them in and get them treated. But I just want what works. And yeah, as you said, people are dismissing this. It hasn't even been tried yet.
Well, there was the point made at the press conference on Monday. There was, I forget who the other minister was, his name, but they mentioned a fellow who had overdosed something like 17 times in the last month. Which, I was thinking, oh my God, like that's every other day this fellow's overdosing. And they were saying, if we can prevent that 18th time, that potentially
Because one of them will
kills
be the
this
final
fellow,
one, yes.
right? Because one of them will be the final one. Then maybe it's worth it to at least say that you tried.
Yeah. Well, and maybe some people need to see it. Another column.
Maybe a
just-
human life is worth that much.
Yeah, like
You know?
way back when the Standard first started, I wrote that column that got that award that first year, and it was just actually writing on experience because I walked through the park over from here, and I encountered an overdose. A young man, he didn't make it, and to look down, like we tried CPR and naloxone, and it didn't, until the paramedics got there, and it was too late, and I just wrote on it because I wanted to share the horror, the helplessness, the frustration, like this is happening. Because I think a lot of people who don't come downtown, people who don't go into these areas,
Yeah.
could look down at a guy who couldn't have been more than in his early 20s, dead, pointlessly. I mean, I don't know if anything could have saved him prior. I don't know, but we can't dismiss this. I mean, it really, that's part of what's
it's a
hit
moral
home.
issue.
And it's part of why it's a pet issue that drives me so much these days on it. They're like, experience it, guys. Go have a look and understand how deep and tragic this is.
You always got to ask yourself, or ask people who are against it, if this was your kid, what would you want?
Well, that's what I kind of said online. I mean, I said, if it's your daughter, your son, who's living behind the dumpster doing unimaginable things to get their next fix, would you really be against just taking that last resort? And that's the thing that people have to understand. This is a last resort, but snatching them up, putting them into a center, yes, against their will, but just trying.
And we actually, without giving too much detail, we actually kind of had an incident here with a staffer and his son who went through something kind of similar where he didn't know whether his son was, alive or dead, and it turned out that he was in police custody.
Yeah.
So
No, it's more common than people think. It's not typical discussion people have.
and it happens
pretty
in the burbs
personal.
too,
Oh,
but I think it's more visible downtown.
Yeah, it's not exclusive to, again, people say, it's from broken households or things. I mean, those are contributing factors, but this could happen to anybody. It can happen to anybody. And, well, either way, let's hope for success. I mean, that's the thing. I'm rooting for success. Get off the ideology. The money's going to be spent. Let's hope these centers go up and save some lives, because it's certainly not working otherwise. All right. Let's go federal. Something a little more upbeat.
You were talking about the leadership debate and upbeat in the same sentence?
Yeah, well, at least we can make light of some of these things, or maybe, I mean,
I haven't talked to one person who sat through the whole thing except for maybe Jen, and she was assigned.
this is the Liberal Party leadership debate for the contenders, the love-in. I mean, you got to understand, it's an internal battle, so you don't really want to cut to the core on it necessarily. I see it when it gets this boring, though. It means that they've already kind of conceded that Carney's going to win, so I'm not going to shoot too hard because I want to be in cabinet when he gets there.
Or they don't want to shoot themselves in the foot, given the precarious
we'll get to
situation that
that.
they already kind of find themselves in, it seems. You've got the story right there.
Actually, this story suggests that they're not so precarious. The Liberals take the lead for the first time since 2021, says Ipsos Reid.
Would you want to screw that up?
You certainly wouldn't, but in my opinion, a couple of them almost did. But, just to say what this story is saying, after nearly 4 years of Conservative dominance in the polls, the Liberal Party of Canada has taken a 2-point lead among decided voters. They were 26 points behind just 6 weeks ago. Obviously, what has happened is that they have seized upon the opportunity afforded them by President Trump.
A certain American gentleman.
A certain American gentleman who said we're going to apply some tariffs one day. It was going to be February, then it was going to be March, now it's going to be April, but one day tariffs are coming.
Well, it was more than that. It was a hockey game. It was...
It's been a lot of provocative statements.
A lot of stuff. So here we are. And for those of us on the conservative side of things who look at it through the conservative lens, it's quite appalling that the Liberals should profit from this when the things that Trump has pointed out are mostly the consequences of their own maladministration for nearly 10 years.
Absolutely.
I mean, listening to them say, well, we're going to fix the defense, we're going to fix productivity, we're going to fix the economy. Well, you've been in government for 10 years.
All the things they screwed up.
My wife put it beautifully as she was cooking the dinner there. I'm watching this out of one eye. She said, every admission, every promise is an admission of guilt.
Right.
It's a good way to put it. Very good.
It was a good way to put it, I'm giving her the credit for that one. But there's no good saying we're going to fix productivity when productivity is tanked on your watch. Mm-hmm. Do it. You're still the government.
Well, and
it's open to you.
What frustrates with Canadian voters then, so you just cut the head off of this ugly monster and put a new head on it, and apparently that's enough. At first I was dismissing these. Frank Graves and Eco's okay. He's Frank Graves, but no, we've seen a number of polls now from a number of pollsters that are showing a pretty distinct trend that Canadians are embracing the Liberals again. I think it might be soft. When it grows that fast, it's reactionary. It's quite a difference between after an election campaign and making up your mind to make an X on a ballot, but it's real. And
well, you could argue, though, that the last 2 years have been kind of out of whack because when has a Conservative Party ever had a 25-point lead over any incumbent government, no matter how unpopular, even going back to the days of Mulroney and, the first Trudeau?
It's exceptional, but a 25-point recovery in a matter of a few weeks.
Well, I didn't sit through the whole thing, but I watched enough of it last night to know that, Carney is not a very good speaker. And when you get onto an election trail, some of these points that you've just made that, they're the authors of, their own demise. There was a reason why they were 25 points down in the polls. And you have to think that, Polyev he's very fluent in French. He's very quick on his feet. He's sharp. He's got a good wit. And, quite frankly, a lot of their policies are probably more in line with mainstream Canadian views at this point. So I think that once we get out into an election and on the trail, the Chrystia Freelands and all the lesser lights of the Trudeau era are, they're going to be falling over themselves and stumbling. And
well, I think maybe Chrystia Freeland has already committed a fairly major stumble. I wonder if we could just run that clip.
Let's run that up.
Yes.
Yeah, this is something to behold.
It is critical that we spend that money here in Canada on Canadian companies, and we need to be thinking about the next generation of warfare. As we're seeing in Ukraine, drones, AI, these are really important. Our 2% should not be about sending checks to the United States. Critically, we need a plan to defend our own borders, very particularly the Arctic, and we need to be working with our Nordic and EU NATO partners. They have nuclear weapons. We need to say to them, we need a plan to protect and defend our shared Arctic without the US, and Canada will step up because it's our sovereignty that's at stake as well.
So we have actually gone from talking about trade to deploying nuclear weapons to defend the Arctic, and this is somebody who seriously wants to be Prime Minister.
She is, something I said long ago on one of her shows. We were speculating about who might replace Trudeau before he'd even step down. And I dismissed her off the beginning because I said, Freeland's just too weird. And she is.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is dangerous sort of conversation. Thankfully, it's just a leadership contender and not a leader talking about these sorts of things.
By the way, you have to ask you, did she check with Sir Keir Starmer in Great Britain whether our nuclear weapons would be available? You know, the odd Valiant-class submarine on patrol at Canada's or Macron in France.
That they left the hatch open on and
You know, what
catches fire.
What are they?
And I've worked in the Arctic, and you know, when I'm out on the ice, look, we can see land when you get these odd. It's interesting when you get the right air pressure and you can see islands in the distance. And I can see Alaska. She seems to be forgetting that the Americans are an Arctic nation as well. If we're going to be talking about Arctic sovereignty, we got to be talking about it with them, not saying, "Oh, we're going to reach out to UK and put nukes there to stop the big bad Americans." You nutcase.
What I find appalling about that clip and about her. I mean, what she was saying was that America has become predatory, therefore we have to have an alternative alliance to America, and we got to get. We didn't play the whole thing, but we got to get Japan and Australia, and then she went on about Denmark and the Nordics, and got to get France and Britain because they got nuclear weapons.
Yeah, great.
And meanwhile, in Washington, in the basement of the boiler room, there is somebody sitting there with a PC and a coffee machine, and they've been told to watch the Liberal debate and report back upstairs if anybody says anything interesting. And they're kind of sitting there like this. And all of a sudden, she started talking about an alternative nuclear alliance to the United States. We have yet to see what Mr. Trump will make of this. But if he is advised of it and mocks it, then be it on her head for bringing it forward. That was the craziest thing in that whole 2 hours session. And there were some other crazy things.
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, they were just campaigning against their own record, though. It's just that was the more outstanding thing of the bunch. So, I mean, I think, again, even most liberals will realize, wow, Freeland, you're here, whatever you are. Carney's got this probably in the bag. But something that hasn't been mentioned enough was the French debate. Because it really exposed one fatal flaw the Liberals have right now, which they rarely have ever gotten out of leaders. But Carney can't speak French to save his life.
No.
I mean, he speaks it better than I do. I'll give him that. But even as an English speaker, I can recognize a guy speaking with a very thick English accent, and he couldn't understand the questions, which is, one thing to be able to respond slowly in French. But if you can't understand the question coming at you, Quebec will not vote for a leader who can't speak French. That's just and Polyev is very fluent in French, and of course Blanchette's just going to love mopping the floor with Carney. They will, the Liberals, as much as the polls seem nice now, let's run a campaign when your leader can't speak good French.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't very charismatic in English either.
No, but at least he was understandable.
He's kind of dry, boring.
Chrétien wasn't understandable, and he still won it.
Kind of academic, what you would expect from a banker.
When he launched his campaign in Edmonton, what was that, about a month ago? When I watched it, I thought, well, compared to Mr. Trudeau, this man sounds mature. He's projecting good judgment. He's not an exciting speaker, but at least he's not trying to be an exciting speaker when that's not his natural pose. I mean, it would have been a little crazy. I couldn't help thinking of Michael Ignatieff back in,
me too.
2011. Michael Ignatieff is a really nice guy. He's good. He's a good man. He's fun. He's smart. The thing is, he's not a campaigner.
No.
And never was, and somebody should have told him. And he dropped down to 34 seats.
Right.
So, and then he resigned, and Mr. Trudeau became the leader of the opposition. I see Carney and Ignatieff in the same thing. It seems that you can't pull experts in from outside and say, all right, you save us, because we politicians have failed, which obviously they have. I said, oh, yeah, well, all right, we'll take that on. I mean, Mr. Carney was claiming in the debate last night that he's an expert in economics and a good negotiator.
Have no doubt about it.
We will see how good.
But that was the difference with Trudeau, though, is that the Prime Minister was a good debater. Like in the debate against Harper, when he was on the anniversary of his father's death and he wore the black suit and he hit back or whatever. You could say, he's a little empty up here.
He knows how to
the
perform,
policy.
though,
Yeah, But he did present himself fairly well.
If Mr. Carney ends up getting elected as leader and then as prime minister, he is going to need to be a good negotiator. But let's face it, Trump made his billions on being a good negotiator.
Well, dealing with people like Carney in the banks,
You know,
negotiating
bigger
attractive
discussion.
loan terms.
read the damn book. The art of the deal.
Yeah, I read your column about how you picked it up at the church sale.
It's been around for 40 years. None of this should be a surprise.
No.
So, I mean, just to close on the federal issue, though, assuming Carney wins now, do you think he's going to make the quick leap and pull for a quick snap election? Or is he going to try and throw the dice, cut a deal with Singh? Because, I mean, there should be a confidence vote shortly after Parliament resumes. So he's not going to have a choice unless he cuts a deal with Singh, which is very possible. Do you think we're in for a spring election pretty quickly here? Or
Yeah, I do. I don't think he can cut a deal with Singh. I think that's toxic. And most of the gain in the Liberal support is coming at the expense of the NDP. My partner's from Italy, and they have these coalition governments and things. And I was explaining to her, she was saying, like, why would all these people jump from the NDP to the Liberals? And it was, well, if you didn't think that the Liberals were going to win, and you're kind of on that kind of left extreme, then maybe you'd throw your vote for Singh, right? But now that they seem to have a chance, then you come back home, right? So I don't think that he will cut a deal. I think there will be a spring election. I think he'll go right into it. He'll pull the carbon tax.
So, okay, I think I agree with you, but if I was going to be argumentative for the sake of it, and Lord knows, in opinion, that's what we do. If I was going to be argumentative for the sake of it, I would say, well, Mr. Carney can barely order coffee in French. Wouldn't he want to use the excuse that he needed time to hone his language skills? So let's stay with the October date that has been, we will look after things with Mr. Trump in the meantime. And although you're correct in saying, or at least Ipsos Reid is saying, that the support that has gone to the Liberals has come from the NDP. Nevertheless, as we speak at this moment, the NDP do have the seats. And I can see how Mr. Singh might say, well, of course, when we said that we were not going to support them any longer, Mr. Trump hadn't threatened tariffs. This changes everything. So as patriotic Canadians, we will support the government through this time of crisis and trial.
I could see that, say, more than honing up on his language skills, as an attempt to maybe put through an economic platform and throw out some dog bones to the NDP. But then why wouldn't, if you were an NDP supporter that would be leaning Liberal, basically just to vote against Polyev, why would you vote against Singh if he was racking up these kind of victories?
Times are bizarre, though. Everything's believable now.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of turn to the man south of the border.
The man.
And so Trump, again, is mixed messaging. He's over and over, we don't need Canadian oil. We can do without Canadian oil. Oh, yeah, we got to get the Keystone going. Well, it's not Japanese oil would come through that thing. Not that I see a lineup of private investors wanting to dive back into the Keystone anyways. But he's talking about now the importance of bringing in Canadian oil, while the other next day he's talking about the lack of need for Canadian oil. This would make him so difficult to negotiate with because you don't really know even what the heck he wants.
Right.
But the Keystone, is this thing alive again or what?
Well, to your point about you don't know what you're dealing with, that's part of the negotiation strategy. Just when you've got your talking points lined up, he says something different. Yeah. It seems to work for him. Now, we'll see. The question that I would have is that pipe that was laid for Keystone 5 years ago, is that still in the ground?
Nope. It's been completely ripped out. And the pipe itself has been sitting out in the field in the middle of Saskatchewan rusting. It would have to be recast, recoated, everything. Okay. You'd have to start over completely from scratch. So I would say unless he wanted to build it south going north and then have to deal with our government, it's probably a moot point at this point. Now, that said, there are some things that they could do that maybe don't require these regulatory hurdles. Like you can do line looping and you can increase pressure on certain line segments, so you can alter the spec of the oil so that flows through with less friction, and you wind up with more barrels. And as a short-term solution, you might be able to increase the capacity, maybe by something close to 1 million barrels a day, which is still like about 25%, which is still fairly significant. It gives you a little bit of running room, maybe for a few years until you could actually come up with a longer-term, more viable solution. But
ramping production that much too. I mean, that's a big investment on the parts of producers.
Just even to get
under
the production.
Speculation that you're going to have it's just.
You got to get the wells, you got to get the reserves. You've worked in the oil patch, so
Yes,
you know how
it's
it
not
is.
an overnight thing.
And you have to book it, and you have to get the financing, and you have to have all your ducks in a row.
And that's what I guess my frustration. I know you're talking about Trump using it as a negotiating tool, but as we know too, the business, particularly oil and gas, hates instability. I mean, they just want to know what they're dealing with, and we don't know what we're dealing with. I just can't see private operators saying, "Yeah, you know what? I'll dive into this."
Well, and TransCanada just got burned here back in October for, what was it, $15 billion? So it was their claim under the old NAFTA, and it got rejected. Alberta's still on the hook for $1.5 billion, and then I think there's another $2 billion. Like, it's almost $3.5 billion.
Problem for Ken when he got in and backstocked the keys.
Yeah, when Kenny was going to put his money where his mouth was.
We put our money
Our money where his mouth was. So, no.
So how many miles of Canadian Keystone would have to be rebuilt?
All of it.
Well, yeah, but is that 150, 300? What are we looking at?
Yeah, well, I think it's 1,900 kilometers all the way down to Oklahoma.
As Nigel saying, it'd be a couple hundred kilometers up on our end.
Yeah, I suppose
Was it
the
just out here?
smallest portion of it is
Yeah,
in
and
Canada.
it is prairie. I mean, it's not the worst area to put pipe. If we had the will on the part of both governments and somewhere a private investor, it could be done in an expedited.
It's not like we're crossing mountain ranges or anything.
No, it's not like the Trans Mountain. Well, we'll see. We're burning the time rate. There's just, again, so much to cover. Maybe we'll just kind of hit on some lighter notes while we go, because we don't know with a lot of these airlines. They're dropping from the skies like
Oh yeah, there's raining cats and dogs and airliners. I actually did do a little bit of background work on this one, and here's what happens. Something bad happens, and something bad did happen.
Yes.
Immediately, the newsrooms of the nations go around and look for comparables. They all want to be first to spot a trend. And I understand that. That's we're in the news business. That's what we do. However, when you actually examine the statistics, you find that there is not a trend. Actually, overall, if there is any trend, it's downwards and in the best possible way. In Canada, the NTSB, that's the American organization, the Canadian equivalent, actually tells us that where are my notes? Damn it. That's it. Here we go. All right.
You're the one that uses the
The
printer.
Transportation Safety Board received 1,020 reports of air occurrences in 2023, 182 actual accidents. This is Canadian numbers. It's 2023, and 838 incidents. And that number is higher than the previous year, but it is below the yearly average of 220 accidents reported in the prior 10 years.
And we're talking everything, right?
We are talking, that is specifically airplanes crumpled up on a little aluminum bowl.
Right.
There
Not
are
necessarily commercial.
that includes general aviation, and that is where most of the sadness is.
It's usually the small ones.
Yeah, they divide between general aviation and commercial is pretty bloody safe.
My stepdad was an inspector.
Yeah?
Yep.
Well,
After a
Peter,
career at the
can we get him on the show?
Well, he's dead, but
Not a plane crash.
but not in a plane crash. No, he investigated the plane crashes.
The same pattern in the United States.
So just a note before we get to our parting shots, then, folks, don't cancel those trips. Your flights will probably be fine. I'm still going to take my fifth wheel to Arizona. I feel more comfortable.
Well, I was just going to make the point, when Reagan came in, one of his first things, you remember he fired something like 15,000 air traffic controllers, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a major accident that happened right after that, but nobody went out of their way to blame him specifically for it.
So either way, yes, it seems to be a
And it wasn't
perception
DEI,
thing,
I don't think.
thankfully, and the DEI is another. All right, so Parting shots on our way out. I'll start with you, Shaun.
Well, I was just going to go back to the Keystone because there seems to be a lot of wishful thinking, not just on the part of Trump, but here in Canada, that somehow this thing's going to be built. But, like I was saying to Nigel before the show, would you put up $15 billion of your own money to try to get something into the ground where it might take 10 or 12 years? It might be another 30 billion over budget, and you have absolutely no idea whether or not it's ever going to actually get built.
It's a leap of faith.
So, chances are like you said, Cory, the oil patch is very risk averse. So chances are you're just going to wind up leaving that oil in the ground.
Oof, I hate that thought. All right, Nigel.
Forever though.
Yeah.
So I was relieved, I think, like everybody else, that the asteroid isn't going to hit the Earth after all.
Ah, yes.
And it made me look things up, and it turned, even in a story like that, they managed to drag Elon Musk into it and try to smear him. The issue is, remember 6 or 7 years ago that he put a Tesla into orbit? And this thing is out there, is buzzing around somewhere between Mars and the sun. And people forgot about it, and then there was a keen little amateur astronomer. I see something.
It's a Tesla.
And, well, he didn't know. He just said, I see something.
He thought he discovered an asteroid.
He thought he discovered a new asteroid. Anyway, Mr. Musk, very irresponsible, putting a sports car into space. That's just crazy stuff.
Have you ever seen the Tesla array, now that you've brought it up?
No.
It passes over, and you can actually Google it and find out when it's going to pass over.
Oh, yeah?
But the first time I saw it was right after the Ukraine war, and I seem to think that it was the Russians shooting missiles. It's actually quite a sight to see. You see about 13 of these things.
Oh, the Starlink, you mean, yeah.
Yeah, the Starlink. Yeah, the Starlink
Great.
array.
Okay. We've wrapped our time. I hope a lot of people are watching on their Starlinks. I know that's what I use down in Pritis anyways. So we've run the time up. I'll leave just with my final quick shot. A trade deficit isn't a subsidy. Look it up, people. I'm tired of this discussion. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of issues. Thank you very much, Nigel. Shaun, it just wasn't enough time to cover them all. There's
sorry.
so much to go on
No,
about.
and your little statement there is very apt as well.
Yeah, so thank you all for tuning in, guys. Be sure to take out a subscription. That's how we pay the bills around here. It's very important. We appreciate you following and watching. So thank you all again, and we will have this discussion next week with a whole new bunch of issues to break down.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.